I never thought I'd be writing this story. Looking back now, it feels surreal, like I was living in a movie. But everything that happened was painfully real. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday morning at Crestwood High School. I was a junior, just trying to get through my classes and hang out with friends. My name is Amelia, and I'm a pretty average kid. I love playing basketball and hanging out with my friends. But my life turned upside down when Principal Roberts decided to take action on something that changed everything for me and my family. He had been the principal for a few years. People talked about him a lot. Some loved him for his strict rules, while others felt he was too harsh. I was never a fan, but I never thought I would be affected by him in such a big way. I remember one day in the cafeteria, he made a big scene because a group of students was laughing too loudly. He yelled at them, calling it a disruption and warning everyone else to behave. That was just who he was, always quick to judge and even quicker to punish. That Tuesday, I was sitting at my usual table with my friends, Marcus and Lena, when things went wrong. We were joking around, as usual, when a few kids from another table started to shout some racist comments. It wasn't the first time I had heard such things at school. Sadly, it was a part of life at Crestwood. But this time, I decided I had had enough. I stood up and confronted them. "Hey, that's not okay," I shouted, my heart racing. The laughter stopped and all eyes turned to me. I could feel the tension in the air. The boys looked at me with anger in their eyes, but I stood my ground. I wouldn't let them get away with it. But Principal Roberts happened to be walking by and heard the commotion. He stormed over, his face turning red with anger. He didn't ask what had happened. All he saw was me standing up to a group of kids. "What is going on here?" he barked. "They were being racist," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can't let that happen in school." Instead of supporting me, he turned to the other students and dismissed their behavior. Then he looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "You need to learn to control yourself, Amelia. This kind of behavior is unacceptable." I felt my heart drop. "But I was just standing up for what's right," I protested. Principal Roberts didn't care. He pointed a finger at me and said, "You are suspended for a week for disruption. Maybe you'll learn your lesson." I couldn't believe it. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under my feet. I was ready to argue more, but I knew it was useless. I sat down, crushed, as he walked away. The news spread quickly. My friends were furious. "This isn't fair," Marcus shouted. "You were just being brave." "I can't believe he did that," Lena added, shaking her head. I went home feeling defeated. I didn't even want to tell my dad. He was the owner of Crestwood High and had worked so hard to make it a safe place for everyone. I knew he would be upset, but I didn't want to burden him with my problems. When I got home, my dad was waiting for me in the living room. He could see something was wrong. "Hey buddy, what's going on?" he asked, his voice gentle. I took a deep breath and told him everything. I expected him to be angry or disappointed, but instead, he just listened. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "Amelia, I'm so proud of you for standing up against racism," he said finally. "But we need to address this with Principal Roberts. It's not right." I nodded, feeling a little better knowing I had his support. My dad called a meeting with the principal for the next day. I didn't know what to expect, but I felt a mix of anxiety and hope. The next day arrived, and we walked into the principal's office together. I was nervous as I sat down across from Principal Roberts, who looked smug as he glanced at my dad. "What can I do for you?" he asked, his tone condescending. My dad cleared his throat. "I want to discuss Amelia's suspension," he began, his voice steady. "I don't think it was justified," Principal Roberts scoffed. "Your son was being disrespectful. I can't have students disrupting the school environment." "Disrespectful?" my dad said, his voice rising. "He stood up against racism. That should be commended, not punished." The tension in the room grew thick. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks as I listened to the two of them argue. Principal Roberts refused to back down, insisting that I needed to learn respect. Finally, my dad slammed his hand on the table. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about discipline, it's about setting an example. You're the principal. You should be teaching students to stand up against hate, not punishing them for it." Principal Roberts shifted uncomfortably. "I run this school, And I make the rules, he said, but his voice lacked the confidence it had before. My dad wasn't done. You might run this school, but I own it, and I will not let you treat my son or any student this way. You need to understand that racism has no place here, and if you can't support that, I will have to reconsider your position. The room fell silent, and I felt a rush of emotions, fear, pride, and disbelief. I had never seen my dad stand up to someone like that. Principal Roberts finally shifted in his seat, looking defeated. Fine, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll rescind the suspension, but I expect this sort of behavior to stop. My dad nodded, but I could tell he wasn't satisfied. This isn't just about Amelia, he said. We need to have a meeting with all the staff and students. Address this issue head on. We can't sweep it under the rug. Principal Roberts begrudgingly agreed, and we left his office. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as we walked out. My dad had my back, and it felt amazing. The next few days were a whirlwind. My dad organized a school-wide assembly to address racism. I was nervous to speak in front of everyone, but my dad encouraged me. Your voice matters, he said. When the day of the assembly arrived, the gym was packed. I stood on stage, looking out at my classmates and teachers. My heart raced, but I took a deep breath and began to speak. I want to talk about what happened, I said, my voice shaking. Racism is not okay. It hurts people and tears us apart. We need to stand together against it. I could see some people nodding while others looked uncomfortable, but I pushed through, sharing my experience and the importance of speaking up. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment before breaking into applause. I felt a rush of emotions, fear, relief, and pride. I had done it. After the assembly, I felt a change in the air. More students began to speak up against racism, and the school started to feel different. Principal Roberts was still there, but he seemed to be more careful about his words and actions. Weeks passed, and I started to feel a sense of hope. My father had made a real difference, and I was proud to stand alongside him. But then, one day, I overheard a conversation that shook me to my core. I was walking down the hallway when I heard Principal Roberts talking to another teacher. I can't believe the board let him get away with this, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Just wait, I'll find a way to make him pay for this. My heart sank. I knew he was still bitter about the assembly and my dad's involvement. I couldn't let him get away with this. I had to tell my dad what I heard. That night, I gathered all my courage and told my dad everything. His expression darkened as I spoke, and I could see the anger boiling just beneath the surface. Thank you for telling me, Amelia, he said finally, his voice calm but firm. We need to address this. I won't let him intimidate us. The next day, my dad called an emergency meeting with the board members. He laid everything out, explaining what I had overheard and how it affected the school environment. The board was shocked. They listened intently, and when my dad finished, there was a heavy silence. Finally, one of the members spoke up. We need to take this seriously. Racism has no place in our schools, and we need to support our students. They decided to investigate Principal Roberts's behavior. I was terrified about what could happen, but I also felt a sense of relief. My dad was standing up for what was right, and I was proud to be his son. Weeks went by, and I started to notice changes. More teachers began to promote inclusivity and address the issues of racism in their classes. It felt like a new era at Crestwood High. But then, the day came when the board made their decision on Principal Roberts. I sat in the meeting, my heart pounding. When the board announced that they were letting him go, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, anger, and sadness. I knew he had done wrong, but I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. He had lost his job, and I wondered if he would ever change. When the meeting ended, my dad hugged me tightly. You did the right thing, Amelia. Standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. I smiled, feeling the weight of the past few months lift off my shoulders. I had learned so much about bravery, integrity, and the importance of using my voice. Crestwood High was different now. We were more united, and more students were willing to stand up against hate. I felt proud of what we had accomplished together. Looking back, I never thought a single moment could change my life so drastically, but it did. And I knew that as long as I stood up for what was right, I would never back down from making a difference. This was just the beginning of my journey, and I was ready for whatever came next.